East Washington. I was scheduled to meet my friend Matt at the state border in Newport, Washington, and he would drive us back to Spokane to stay at his place for the night. I chilled at a restaurant because he was 2 hours late picking me up. When he arrived, we cleaned his back seat and found a way to shove my bike and gear into that small Honda CR-V. Over the 40 miles to Spokane, we caught up on our lives since I hadn't seen him in 4 years. Matt and I know each other through skateboarding in Kansas City. He moved to Washington to become an airplane mechanic. Neither of us had skated in a while, so we hit the local skate park before going to his apartment. The day was scorching, and after skating for 30 minutes, we were both exhausted. It's funny how biking doesn't help my skating endurance. Matt suggested we swim in a river 15 minutes away, and I was all about it. We jumped into the shallow stream, and I wasn't ready for the cold mountain water. I felt my blood physically stop flowing, and my body went numb. I couldn't feel anything from the neck down. Matt was laughing at me because his body was used to the temperature shock. We grilled food and cracked some beers when we got to his apartment. Having this intentional one-on-one with Matt and reminiscing about the skate scene felt good. We fueled each other with storytelling and shared our big dreams for the future. I was proud of him for living his dreams and becoming successful. Back in Sandpoint, Jeff told me I should ride on I-90 to Seattle from Spokane. It was faster, had less steep mountain passes, and was direct. I did some research and found a couple of credible sources online, including the DOT website, that stated bicycles were allowed on I-90 with a few exceptions in the mountains. I was psyched that I had permission to ride on the interstate. The shoulder was bigger, the roads were flatter, and the number of cars helped draft me faster. I conveniently saw a sign at the interstate entrance with a bicycle symbol and the I-90 logo. Even more confirmation that I was allowed to ride it. I merged on and was ready for a good time. Yeehaw! Immediately, I was drafting off the traffic, and it was a breeze to pedal. No pun intended. I was probably averaging 18 miles an hour and felt giddy every time I passed another mile marker. The highway out of the city was primarily downhill or flat, and the draft entered me into a vortex boost. The landscape changed the further I rode away from Spokane. The day started with trees and forest, but slowly transformed into dead grass and large transformer towers in every direction. Matt had warned me that it was desolate out there, and now I knew what he meant. I rode 30 miles before the first hill climb. I saw a rest area with a sign that said, "Free coffee, volunteer run." I was willing to partake and made the slow quarter-mile climb to the top of the hill and found shelter in the shade. There was a little snack shack manned by a couple of retirees with big smiles and a slew of wonderful snacks. I guess the state of Washington allows volunteers, in this case, the Line Dancing Club of Spokane, to bring snacks and give them away to travelers for donations. They had fruit, fresh baked goods, coffee, and lemonade. The volunteers were friendly, and it may have been the best time I've ever had at a rest stop. I rode I-90 until 3 p.m. when I saw a state trooper clocking people in the middle of the highway. I got nervous, but figured I had enough evidence to hold my own if he made a fuss. 2 minutes later, he flipped a U-turn and pulled me over. He said I'm on a limited access highway and bicycles are not allowed, blah, blah, blah. Thankfully, I was getting phone service. I showed him the legitimate sources I found online that stated the legality of riding on I-90. I even showed him the sign with a bicycle symbol pointing to the interstate. I figured that was irrefutable evidence. He was not swayed and said I still had to get off the interstate. He mentioned there was an access road that brought me into the next town, and I would need to get on that. My license showed I was from Kansas City, and he said he and his wife had just moved from there. Small world. I had to take a roundabout route to continue heading west. I got back on the interstate an hour later so I could avoid riding around Lake Moses to the north. I didn't want to try my luck and found a dirt access road that spanned 10 miles before heading south on a rural highway. I would route 16 miles south, then another 20 miles west to get to the next town. I was not stoked for this detour. It was 8 p.m. when I started south, and I wanted to get as far as I could tonight. I had already ridden over 90 miles for the day. I discovered I was riding through Washington orchard country. A farmer on an ATV saw me riding and stopped me to talk and share some nectarines. I was thankful, and that fruit gave me a boost of encouragement. It was hands down the freshest nectarine I had ever had in my life. Yum. I was nervous as where I would sleep for the night. I knew I wouldn't make it to the town of Vantage without exhausting myself. The fields I was riding through were so wide open I would never find a good hiding spot to stealth camp. Not to mention, every field had a no trespassing sign. The last thing I want is a farmer pointing a gun in my face. I saw giant 20-foot haystacks sitting off the side of the road. I imagined myself scaling one and sleeping on top. As fun as that sounded, I was afraid of rolling off the side or the stacks falling over for my weight. Too risky. I had completely lost sunlight and was ready to settle down. My morale was getting lower as the minutes passed. All I wanted was to be in the super speed of the interstate and to get over the dumb mountains to stay with my friends in Seattle. I finally came across an abandoned house on the corner of a field. It was completely grown over with all the windows broken out. The walls were leaning and vines were growing out of every crevice. If I slept inside, I was bound to get possessed by an evil spirit and have worse problems. I opted to pitch my tent behind a patch of trees. I was just hidden enough that only the house half a mile away could possibly see me. In the dark, there was no way they'd know I was there. I was happy to find a solid spot to sleep and counted my blessings. I was worn out and disappointed to not make my goal for the day. This was the best case scenario, all things considered. I settled in and set my alarm for the butt crack of dawn, Hopefully not Dawn of the Dead. 4:30 a.m. seemed early enough to be out before the first rooster crows. I was still nervous about trespassing, but settled enough that sleep might actually be an option tonight. I enjoyed the cool night air and crossed my fingers. Please don't get possessed by a demon, Richie. The next morning, I woke up unscathed by spirits and clear of angry farmers. I packed out in the pitch black of dawn and started my way through the unmaintained dirt roads that weaved in and out of crops. The stalks of plants were taller than me, and a light fog hovered as I attempted to navigate with my inadequate headlight and offline Google Map. I got sprayed by a big field watering machine, and that woke me up faster than a cup of coffee. These roads were bumpy, messy, and my only hope was not getting lost before seeing the Columbia River. These paths could barely even be considered roads. I finally got back on a semi-even dirt road that spit me onto the paved highway 40 minutes later. A very exciting way to start the day, and all before the sun crept onto the horizon. Once on the highway, riding was a breeze. There was a mountainous downhill curving down toward the river. The Highway 26 forked back onto I-90, and I would have to cross the interstate bridge to get over the river. It was a stark contrast going from flat, bumpy fields to instantly following mountain cliffs along the water. I had to climb a mile-long U-turn entrance ramp to enter the westward-bound I-90 bridge toward the town of Vantage. I had no clue what would be in town, but I was crossing my fingers for coffee. I made the slow climb onto the interstate, and thankfully, the bridge was downhill across the river. The lighting was beautiful as orange and red colors radiated off the hills and rock. The sunrise looking over the water was stunning. I made it across onto the Vantage Highway, the only road that parallels I-90 to Seattle. Unfortunately, the town itself was barren, and there was no coffee or food for me. The highway looked swervy on the map, but you only know what it'll be like once you get there. Quickly after leaving town, I felt the road start to angle up. No worries, I figured. I'd be climbing for a while anyways. To my dismay, a devilish headwind crept up on me, and I was doomed. This valley was lined with windmills in every direction, and they all ran at optimal turbine power. I was exhausted from the early wake-up call, and a headwind was the last thing I needed. As I slowly ascended the winding valley road, riding off the side of the cliff sounded more pleasant than riding against gravity. I tried convincing my brain to keep going and telling myself it would be worth it. Within a couple minutes, I mentally gave up and cursed the sky. I only pedaled for 30 minutes in the valley before I lost my mind. I was in the middle of nowhere, 20 miles from the closest civilization, and the heat was becoming unbearable. Everything was really working out for me today. I got off my bike and walked up the hill as every ounce of my body wanted to stop and just die right there. After the first mile of walking, I found a less steep bend and attempted to pedal again. It was just as hard and made me just as pissed off. This experience was the culmination of all other negative experiences coming together to create a very angry Richard. I continued to walk my bike for what felt like an hour before I decided to start hitching it. I'd never thought hitchhiking would be an option for me, but I was mentally in a dark place and couldn't think of any other way to feel better. The hills seemed to never end, and at this rate, I wouldn't make it to the next town of Ellensburg until dinner time. It was 8:30 a.m. Walking a loaded bicycle is so much harder than pedaling. Several small cars went by, and I knew I couldn't catch a ride with them. 20 minutes later, I saw a work truck in the distance. It was some kind of heavy-duty farm truck, and they were hauling hay. I thumbed it, and they thankfully stopped. I explained my situation, and they were more than happy to take me past the hills and to the outskirts of town. It was a husband and wife, and they did some kind of farming in the area. I told them the short version of my story, and they seemed most amazed that I could take 6 months off my job. We only had a 20-minute drive before they dropped me off at the end of their driveway, about 2 miles from town. When we got out of the car, I felt the temperature at least 15 degrees cooler, and the wind was non-existent. I realized that valley was some kind of twilight zone built for my torture. I had given up and had no emotional energy left to make it through the Cascade Mountains. I was in a terrible mood, and all I wanted was to relax with friends and not deal with myself anymore. I suck. I decided to rent a car and drive the remaining 100 miles to Seattle. To save money, I would take the car back to Ellensburg the next day and take the Greyhound bus back to Seattle. A bus ticket was only $30, so I stayed under budget compared to leaving the rental in Seattle. I got my rental around 11 a.m. and headed to the Greyhound office at the Love's truck stop. The office was inside a shipping container and resembled a construction office. There was a tall man behind the counter and a short lady buying a ticket. I sat in the depressing plastic bucket seats and patiently waited my turn. When I inquired about a ticket, I found the cost to be $15 more than the website advertised. I asked why, and the employee went into a massive rant about how Greyhound was on a gnarly one, laying off office employees and trying to drive all ticket traffic online. He was very passionate about it and pissed off at how terrible a company they are. It took him 15 minutes to unload all his woes about the company before we got around to ordering a ticket. When getting to the step where I pay them money, I got out my debit card. He looks at me and says, "Uh-oh." He explained that Greyhound switched their payment system recently, and the new card reader never works. We tried a handful of times, and he said, "Uh-oh. Wait a minute. The guy in Texas Boy gave me his personal number for when this issue ever came up again." He pulled out a handful of random slips he had made notes on and jumbled through them once, but couldn't find the number. He went through it again and carefully inspected each card until he finally found the number. He tells me, "This won't take long. We'll get it up and running soon." So he calls the guy, and they decide to play catch-up and make small talk. I'm in disbelief at how this whole scenario played out. I find my emotions going full circle into laughter. His phone call takes another 15 to 20 minutes, and I'm hoping there's a hidden camera somewhere, so I know this isn't reality. He finally gets the card machine reset, and we try my card. Voila, it works. That was insane. I get my ticket, thank him, then peace the fuck out. American transportation is in shambles and the government subsidizes this nonsense. Now, I just had to drive to Seattle and take in the beauty of the Cascade Mountains. I was about to get on the interstate entrance and I saw a guy with a climbing pack flying a sign that said Seattle. My brain immediately switched into a scene from the movie Dumb and Dumber. Harry and Lloyd are driving the dog truck, and the thugs trying to kill them are inside the car waiting for the right moment. Lloyd sees a group of Hispanic folks trying to hitch a ride. Harry looks him in the eyes and says, "Pick 'em up!" That quote verbally comes out of my mouth as I slam on the brakes and open the passenger door and the back hatch. I assume that's the proper hitching etiquette as a driver. The dude gets in and we introduce ourselves. I asked what his deal was and he told me the whole story. He was in his 50s and his van got a ticket that he couldn't afford. They ended up arresting him and impounding his van in Seattle. Then he got stuck in Ellensburg after being released. The problem was that everything he owned was inside the van, and they didn't let him have any of his belongings. It was going to get auctioned off the next day. He was trying to get back to Seattle to find his van and convince whoever buys his van to give him his stuff back. It was a gnarly situation, but he was a good guy. Once in Seattle, I was slated to stay with my friends Phil and Brenna. Both are creatures of Kansas and ended up leaving for city life once they got married. Phil stands 6'5" and can give the most concrete hug you've ever felt. Brenna is a master barista and has an electrifying personality. Phil and I did some church internships together and somehow experienced formidable times of our lives in tandem. He and Brenna both went to the summer camp I grew up going to, and I hadn't seen them in years. I felt relieved they let me use their apartment as a home base for a few weeks while I bounced between Alaska and Canada. Also, for dealing with my stupid plan to rent a car. After I settled into their apartment, we grabbed dinner, caught up from our years of absence, and talked about what we could do in the big city. The next day, it took me about 3 hours to get to Ellensburg, and I finally got to see the stunning views of US 2, since I didn't ride them like I'd planned. I checked in my rental promptly at 9 a.m. and walked 3.5 miles to the Greyhound station for my 10:30 bus back to Seattle. I only made it a mile by 9:30, and I remember the ticket guy was very stern that I should get there at 10 in case the bus was early. Greyhound doesn't have a great reputation for being on time. I tried jogging in spurts. I got another mile and finally saw the Love's truck stop in the distance. I started running faster, huffing and puffing. I was sweating and hurting and just wanted to get on a bus. I finally touched the parking lot, and it was about 5 minutes to 10. Good job, you knucklehead. I grabbed a quick snack and chilled out to wait for the bus. Thankfully, the ground was shaded and I sat on the sidewalk. 10:30 came and no bus showed up. 11 came around and there was a bus, but it wasn't heading to Seattle. The bus driver used his radio and found out our bus was running 3 to 4 hours late. He couldn't find out the exact location of it and said the bus driver never signed in today. That didn't sound good. I returned to the sidewalk, and another guy with a hiking bag was also there to catch the same bus. His name was Kai, and he was headed to Seattle to grab another bus to Portland. He was from Hawaii and currently hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. He was taking a detour to see the eclipse at a festival in Oregon. High noon came and we still didn't have a bus. Out of nowhere, this crust punk with dreads came over and asked us if we were traveling. We were like, yeah, we're traveling, and we don't know if our bus will ever show up. She asked if we were heading to Seattle and if we wanted a ride with her in a van. We were all for it. She said, you guys can hop in, but we have to do some jugging before we hit the road. I asked what jugging is, and she said, gas jugging, as she laughed and acted like I was an idiot. I was completely oblivious to what that was. I had to Google it and found out it's just panhandling for gasoline. We joined the crew of vagabonds. There were 2 women, 1 guy, and 4 dogs in a beat-up Ford conversion van. Living the good life. We sat around for over an hour while they filled the gas can. They lived their lives in terms of whether they had a half a tank of gas or not. They wouldn't let us give them any money for gas. It was 1:30 p.m. and they finally said we were ready to start driving. Kai and I had yet to find out where our bus was, but I thought this was the best case scenario to ride with these folks anyways. I'm down for new experiences and new friends. We all piled in the back and cuddled with the dogs. We talked about traveling and having the freedom to live however we wanted without being looked down on. We got through the mountains and stopped at another gas station for about 45 minutes to jug some more. We finally made it to Seattle by 4 or 5 p.m., and they dropped us off at the Greyhound station, downtown. I walked Kai to the office and told him good luck for the rest of his journey. I let Phil know I had landed and would take the city bus to get to his place. It had been another exciting day, and I was ready for a break. Seattle was the longest I would stop to rest and visit throughout the whole trip. Most of my time was spent exploring downtown and eating food. I went out to an island and saw whales on the ferry. I took the Downtown Underground tour, which explained how Seattle is built in layers due to being burned and flooded so many times in the early years. I loved spending time with Phil and Brenna in the evenings. Brenna would show me the best coffee. Phil would show me the best beer. I switched it up and stayed with a couple of other friends in the city so Phil wouldn't have to put up with me for 3 weeks straight. The funniest thing I did was get a job. I saw a dishwasher wanted sign on this random restaurant. I figured it could be nice to make $500 while I took a vacation. I talked to the owner on the phone, and he told me just to let him know when I needed to leave town. I worked the dish pit at this high-end restaurant for 3 weekends. It had been years since I worked in a kitchen. This place was 18 miles north of where Phil lived, so the traveling logistics were an adventure. Some nights, an employee would give me a ride home, or I would take the bus if I got out before 10:30. Though I did ride my bike a couple of times. Everyone in the kitchen was really cool and easy to talk to. My dish pit was right behind the cooking area, and the sous chef would give me a plate full of whatever he was cooking at any given moment. I was hyped to chug Dr. Pepper and eat steak 2 nights a week. My rest stop in Seattle was not entirely spent in the city. There were people I needed to see in the north, and I planned a few side adventures scattered throughout my time in the Pacific Northwest. The next chapter will take you on the chaotic journey of side trips.